We begin this morning with new hope in the fight against the Delta and Omicron variants. The FDA has now authorized the use of Pfizer booster shots for kids 16 to 17 years old.
That decision comes just weeks after the FDA and CDC advisory committees debated whether a third dose would even be necessary for kids and teens. Right now, hospitalization rates across the country are surging as the Delta variant continues to spread during the winter holiday season. COVID cases nationwide are up 27% from 2 weeks ago, and COVID deaths increased by 12%. At least 4 states have called in the National Guard to help staff their overwhelmed hospitals, which are mostly treating unvaccinated patients. NBC News medical contributor Dr. KAVITA Patel joins us now with more on this. Dr. Patel, good morning. So what do you think prompted health officials to change their guidance for teens and booster shots? And do you think we can expect to see the next level down, kids 12 to 15, to perhaps be authorized soon for boosters?
Yeah, good morning, Joe and Vicki. So it's interesting. Originally, several months ago, Pfizer did submit an authorization request for 16 and above, and that led to a pretty contentious debate marking that 16 and 17-year-olds just didn't have enough data. It was a combination of now there's accumulating data, and I think that also this emerging data around the value of a third or a booster dose around against Omicron. And so I think that those factors combined with the manufacturer's request for 16 and 17-year-olds led to this authorization. But just a note, it's a may. So unlike the CDC's recommendation for 18 and above, which is that all adults should receive a booster, it's a may recommendation, so a bit softer than what we have for 18 and above.
That is an important distinction, Dr. Patel. Let's talk about this new poll from the Kaiser Family Foundation. It shows most parents are still not sure whether they should vaccinate their children against COVID. More than 60% of the parents who were surveyed feel they don't have enough information to get that vaccination. Talk to us about what you're hearing. What are parents most concerned about? What is this additional information that they're looking for, and where is the best place for them to find those answers?
Yeah, I think the best place really is having time with pediatricians who are incredible stewards of a lot of information, because the concerns that parents are bringing up with me in my conversations with patients have directly to do with, will this vaccine do any harm in the long term to my child? I'm hearing about these reproductive effects, something we heard as a theme with adults still do to this day about any challenges. All of that has not been shown to be true, Vicki, but I think those are important reasons that the Biden administration also has put forward a plan to actually pay pediatricians to counsel families and patients, because they want to have time to get these questions answered, which normally none of us have time to do in our clinic settings.
Dr. Patel, I want to ask you about a new study. Researchers found that COVID infects both fat cells and certain immune cells within body fat. We want to point out this research hasn't been peer-reviewed, but is there any indication as to why people who may be overweight are at higher risk for severe illness? What's your takeaway from this?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Joe. This study actually came out, as you mentioned, not peer-reviewed in October, and it really sparked interest over the last several days, probably thanks to reporting like this. We're trying to shine light on the fact that this was actually a study done by a number of esteemed researchers, including Stanford University, who found that there was evidence of the virus in fat tissue, particularly in humans who have passed from COVID-19. So this is people who have died. These are autopsy cells, as well as you point out, evidence of inflammation cells that have the virus inside. And what it tells us bluntly is that the virus directly attacks fat tissue as well as other tissues and creates this inflammation cascade that results in so many of the things that we have come to understand, diabetes and a lot of issues with blood sugar. We thought that there was a relationship with fat. Now we've pointed to evidence that the virus does affect fat directly. So all key points to make, I think, all pointing to maybe treatments that could be targeted to fat cells directly.
Dr. KAVITA Patel, thanks so much for your insight this morning. All right, we turn now to Chicago, where Jussie Smollett was found guilty of falsely reporting he was the victim of a hate crime.
A jury convicted the former Empire actor, on 5 out of 6 charges of disorderly conduct for lying to police about the attack in 2019.
The special prosecutor spoke right after the verdict was announced.
I told the jury that I thought the evidence was overwhelming, that in fact Mr. Smollett had faked a hate crime and then lied to the police about it, and then compounded his crimes by lying to the jury during the course of this trial and insulting their intelligence.
Smollett could face up to 3 years behind bars, but legal experts say any jail time is unlikely. NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald has the latest from Chicago.
Vicki and Joe, good morning. A jury of 6 men and 6 women combing through evidence over the course of a 7-day trial, deliberating for 2 days, more than 9 hours, before convicting the former Empire star Jussie Smollett of lying to police, saying that he was a victim of a hate crime. Now, prosecutors had said that Smollett had made the entire thing up, in fact, paid $3,500 to 2 brothers to orchestrate the crime. The defense pushing back, saying that Smollett was in fact the victim and that this was spotty police work. In the end, jurors voted to convict Smollett. He is expected to be sentenced early next year. He faces up to 3 years in prison, though legal experts say it's more likely that he will receive probation. Vicki and Joe, back to you.
Thank you, Megan. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos to walk us through the verdict. So let's start with the charges he was facing. There were 6 charges of disorderly conduct. He was convicted on all but 1. Why do you think that is?
That indicates to me that the jury really took the jury instructions seriously, went through the evidence, and concluded, I believe, of course, we'll never know what happened in that room, that Jussie Smollett lied about the certain parts of the attack, but he didn't lie about a particular kind of crime that he said was perpetrated on him. So I think the jury did a good job of parsing that out. And by the way, for that lead-in, I am not one of the legal experts that thinks that he's going to get probation only. These are 5 counts, each of which is a felony. I think a judge is asking for backlash if that judge doesn't sentence him to some time.
So you think he is going to see some jail time, Danny?
Yes, not years upon years, but he is likely to see some time. After all, like I said, 5 felonies, right? Each of which carries potential prison time. Even if you merge those and you sentence him under 1, a judge is just going to have to face the public and say, yeah, look, famous guy, but what the heck? He just, cost us a couple $100,000 in investigations. We'll cut him probation break.
Yeah, not to mention potentially setting back the victims who report real hate crimes. This can be discouraging to them. I want to talk about this. Throughout the week-long trial, people were saying this is going to come down to a he said versus they said, the brothers, right? So Smollett takes the stand. He undergoes this cross-examination. What do you think it was about what he said versus the 2 brothers that the jury believed the brothers over him?
Yeah, I'm going to use a legal term here. What Smollett said was apparently not credible. It just wasn't believable. And that happens sometimes. Look, as a defense attorney, the defense team probably here had a client that thinks he knows better than his defense team. It happens all the time where you have a client who says to his team, look, I know this better. I can convince him. I know what I'm doing. And the irony there is that this client making his own decisions is the reason we're in court to begin with. So these clients, sometimes they're going to do what they're going to do. The client has an absolute constitutional right to testify. All you can do when he makes that decision is prepare him the best you can. Of course, maybe the defense concluded, look, we don't have a whole lot else. What's the harm? He might as well get up there and try to tell a story because we ain't got nothing else.
And speaking of Smollett's defense team, they spoke out after the verdict was read. I want to play a little bit of what they had to say.
We obviously respectfully disagree with the jury's verdict. The verdict is inconsistent. You cannot say Jussie is lying and Jussie is not lying for the same exact incidents. So we feel 100% confident that this case will be won on appeal.
Do you agree? Do they have a good argument for appeal?
First of all, I've had to give those interviews when you walk out after a devastating loss, and it's the worst. And you really always say the same thing. We respectfully disagree with the jury, and we will pursue an appeal. You always say that. But the reality is an appeal is not a brand new look at the case. In other words, the facts are essentially etched in stone. Your only shot is really legal arguments. And even those, if you haven't raised them at trial, it's a long shot. So an appeal is not a fresh look at the case at all. It's basically saying, hey, we're going to do what we can, but we're not going to admit that this is devastating to us, which is what I want to say when people put a microphone in front of me after getting handed a guilty verdict.
You get paid to do that, right? So
I guess, but it never gets easier.
I know. All right. Thanks, Danny. Appreciate your perspective.
We appreciate it. Thank you, Danny. New overnight, a horrific scene where a cargo truck carrying more than 100 passengers crashed on a highway, killing at least 53 and injuring dozens. The victims are believed to be migrants from Central America. And we want to warn you, some of these images are disturbing. We are choosing not to show the most graphic video. NBC News correspondent GUAD VENEGAS joins us now. Good morning, GUAD. What do we know about the crash and the victims at this hour?
Good morning, Vicky. The Mexican president did tweet last night a message to the families of these migrants. He did say these are migrants that were traveling from the border between Mexico and Guatemala in the back of a semi-rig. They believe more than 100 of them were packed inside the semi-rig. And these are the images, as you mentioned, disturbing images. This happened in the state of Chiapas, in the southern state of Chiapas, just outside Tuxtla Gutierrez on a road. Now, other than those that lost their life in the accident, there's also more than 105 injured, 83 men, 22 women. We know that some of those that were inside the vehicle were Guatemalan, and there was also Nicaraguans on board.
As you just mentioned, appear to be from countries throughout Central America. So what are authorities doing right now? Big challenge in trying to determine the identities and also getting back to their families.
Right. So we've seen statements being issued. We saw a statement from the president of Guatemala saying that he deeply regrets the accident, the tragedy in the state of Chiapas. He sympathizes with the families and the victims to whom they're offering all the necessary consular assistance, including repatriations. Same message coming from authorities, Nicaraguan authorities, and from the consulate in Mexico. This is just a terrible tragedy that we've seen. We know a lot of the migrants do what they can to make their way from the Mexican-Guatemalan border. Eventually, these are migrants that want to make it north into the U.S., over to the U.S.-Mexico border. Some of them do hire smugglers that get them across. Others choose to walk the route. And as we can see in this case, these migrants were crammed into the back of a semi-trailer.
Yeah, so many. GUAD, over the years, obviously, we have seen large caravans of migrants traveling on foot through Mexico, occasionally in bigger trucks, but this semi-truck, I mean, is this becoming more common for smugglers? And what do you know about who was driving the vehicle?
Well, the initial reports say that the driver was not found at the scene of the accident. This is very common in Mexico. Whenever any type of accident happens, drivers usually will leave the scene of the accident, regardless of the type of accident, and sometimes, they are arrested later, but the driver was not there when authorities arrived. And as you mentioned, this is an extreme case. Many of the migrants that travel in large groups will usually do it on buses. Others do hire, as we said, smugglers that will transport them in many ways. But even this is extreme for smugglers or from whoever it is that organize this way of transporting. Now, some of the reports say that this vehicle had just gone through a checkpoint, and it was after it went through that checkpoint that it suffered this accident. But more information will be needed to know exactly how it is that the migrants made it onto that semi-trailer. Now, we know that some of the migrants did speak to the media right after the accident. Our colleagues from Telemundo spoke with some of them who survived, telling them that they believed the vehicle was driving fast, but more investigations will be needed from Mexican officials to determine exactly what caused this accident, Vicky.
Trauma upon trauma. GUAD VENEGAS, thank you so much for the reporting.
Political leaders on both sides of the aisle will pause today to pay tribute to former Senator and presidential nominee Bob Dole. His memorial service will take place later this morning in Washington. Dole died last weekend at the age of 98. NBC News senior congressional correspondent Garrett Hake joins us now from the National Cathedral in Washington with a preview. Garrett, good morning to you. Give us a rundown of what we can expect to take place.
Well, Joe, later this morning, the ceremonies will pick up at the Capitol where they left off yesterday, where Dole has been lying in state overnight. His remains will be brought here to the cathedral for this funeral ceremony here today. President Biden is expected to deliver the eulogy here, along with a number of other speakers. From here, it's on to the World War II Memorial on the National Mall. The former senator, former World War II veteran, so closely associated with that memorial. One more public ceremony there, and then his remains will be taken back to Russell, Kansas for a hometown ceremony back in Kansas. A busy day of remembrances for the former senator.
Garrett, as we see, Dole was remembered yesterday while lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda. President Biden, the veteran of the Senate himself, spoke. What more can you tell us about yesterday's tribute?
Tributes yesterday from the majority and minority leaders of the Senate, from Speaker Pelosi, who, of course, reminded the attendees that Bob Dole began his congressional career in the House. Speaker Pelosi never wanted to forget that. And, of course, President Biden also speaking and trying to put Dole in context as someone who was as partisan as a figure as you were likely to see, but also never forgot his patriotism and never forgot really the overall goal of the bodies in which he served. Take a listen to President Biden yesterday at the Capitol.
Bob and I, like many of us here, we disagreed on a number of things, but not on any of the fundamental things. We still found a way to work together. We genuinely respected one another as colleagues and as fellow Americans.
Through all his decades in public service, Bob Dole knew exactly where he came from. A son of Dust Bowl hardship, who was laser focused on food security and rural issues.
Just some of the tributes yesterday to former Senator Dole. We will hear more of it today. You really hear that commitment both to his service, to veterans, and to the disabled community, kind of pillars of Dole's life. Joe.
Garrett, you know Congress well. What do you think will be Senator Dole's long-lasting legacy?
Well, Joe, it's tough to say. I can tell you what I hope it is. I mean, Dole was somebody who was, as I said, as partisan as it comes, somebody who served as minority leader, majority leader in the U.S. Senate. But I think he also showed what it meant to be a good and a patriotic loser. This is someone who ran for the vice presidency, who ran for the presidency multiple times. And even after his defeat, he came back to the Senate. He came back to work for his constituents and for the country. And I think you heard some of that from President Biden yesterday, the reminder that there are bigger things at play than their own egos and their own goals for these lawmakers. There is a country to keep in mind. I think you heard from the president a desire that Dole set that kind of legacy, that your service continues even when your ego is hurt by a loss.
Garrett Hake at the National Cathedral. Garrett, thank you. Now to the White House, where President Biden has reaffirmed America's backing of Ukraine as tens of thousands of Russian troops mass on its border. The president made the commitment yesterday in a phone call with Ukraine's president before speaking with the leaders of 9 NATO allies in Eastern Europe. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now with more on this. Monica, these phone calls come just days after President Biden warned Russian President Vladimir Putin against a possible invasion of Ukraine. So what came out of yesterday's discussion with Ukraine's president?
This was all about reassuring our allies, Joe. And this call, remember, was on the books even before the president spoke with and confronted President Putin. It's very important context and the backdrop for these escalating tensions. And once again, President Biden reiterated his support for a sovereign Ukraine. He communicated to President Zelenskyy, according to the White House, that he gave that message to President Putin quite clearly as well. And then he expressed his hope that these talks will continue and that they will be able to, in coordination with some other allies in the region, continue to really de-escalate this. That is the priority. And after the president spoke with President Zelenskyy, he also spoke to a group known as the Bucharest Nine. So these are the Baltic states, Poland, and expressed similar assurances, saying he doesn't want to see this, of course, escalate. He doesn't want any military intervention, and that the U.S. is prepared to help our allies strategically in the region. And that is the hope, that things stay at this level, but it's unclear. And really this week was all about laying out a roadmap if Russia does decide to really ratchet up those tensions and make more aggressive rhetoric and ultimately military movements into Ukraine. Joe.
Monica, we've heard repeated threats from the White House of severe economic sanctions on Russia if it attacks Ukraine. Is there any indication those sanctions would work?
Well, President Biden had some of his strongest words yet on that, specifically telling reporters these would be the most severe that President Putin or Russia have ever seen before. We know back in 2014, sanctions were slapped on Russia the last time they invaded Ukraine. So this would seemingly go beyond that. But that is the major question. Are they enough of a deterrent? And some skeptics say no. And that is why other measures potentially could be used here, such as, again, strategic supplying of material and equipment to regions and partners in allies and partners in the region. That's something the White House said they're ready to do. They're planning for all contingencies, and that's where things stand right now.
And Monica, quickly, do we know if President Biden offered President Putin any concessions in an attempt to avert an invasion?
The White House indicates no, that there weren't any concessions made, nothing like a tit for tat in terms of what the hope is, that it was a very strongly communicated message. And the State Department reiterated that as well, saying, again, the priority here is for de-escalation and diplomacy. They're hoping to announce some higher level talks today between Russia, the United States, and potentially some NATO allies. That would be the next step. But those talks aren't completely formalized yet, Joe.
All right. Monica Alba at the White House. Thank you, Monica. We have more news from the Capitol this morning. The U.S. is on track to avoid its first ever default after a bipartisan vote in the Senate cleared the way for raising the nation's debt limit. That bill now sitting on President Biden's desk. Here's Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor last night.
I'm really pleased that this chamber has just passed legislation setting up a fast-track process for debt ceiling legislation. No brinksmanship, no default on the debt, no risk of another recession. Responsible governing won the day.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now. Leanne, good morning to you. So this was obviously a major item on the Senate's to-do list. It's a little complicated. It wasn't a bill to raise the debt ceiling. It sort of gets us in that direction. What are the details you can tell us?
That's right, Joe. It was not a bill to lift the debt limit, but it creates new rules for a one-time lift of the debt limit. So they passed this one-time rule change. It will now head to the president's desk where he has to sign it into law. And then the Senate can actually lift the debt limit, which they plan to do next week before that December 15th deadline by about $2 to $3 trillion. So as the late Senator Bob Dole lie in state in the rotunda just feet away from the Senate floor, he was known for his bipartisanship. The Senate was actually able to come together last night in a rare moment of bipartisanship and get this done, Joe.
Let's talk about the January 6th investigation. A federal appeals court ruled Congress is entitled to see the White House documents relating to the Capitol attack, rejecting former President Trump's claim of executive privilege. What else should we know about this ruling? Yeah,
that was a big day for the January 6th Select Committee and a bad day for the former President Donald Trump on this court ruling. The court said that Congress and the January 6th Select Committee has a legislative purpose for access to these documents, also saying that the legislative branch and the executive branch, that's President Biden, who has allowed these documents to be released, have a lot of say here, and that executive privilege does not stand. And so while this will likely go to the Supreme Court, this is a very good signal for the Select Committee that they're able to see the documents they want from the former president, Joe.
And sticking with that January 6th committee, they also heard testimony from several witnesses yesterday, while the deposition from former Trump advisor Jason Miller was postponed. What's the latest with all that?
Yeah, well, the committee has been willing to postpone some of these depositions for a very short amount of time if these people continue to cooperate with the committee. They run out of patience when that cooperation stops. But yesterday, they did hear from a couple people, including Ali Alexander. He's a far-right extremist, and he organized one of the rallies on January 6th, although he contends that it had nothing to do with the people who stormed the Capitol. He was deposed for 8 hours yesterday. It was a very long day. He left the deposition saying that he cooperated and that they now know the truth. So.
Busy times on Capitol Hill. Leanne Caldwell, thanks for keeping us updated. Appreciate it.
Yep.
A jury heard emotional testimony in the trial of Kim Potter, the former Minnesota police officer who shot and killed Daunte Wright during a traffic stop. Yesterday, Wright's girlfriend, who was in the passenger seat when Wright was killed, took the stand. She described the moments leading up to the shooting.
How was Daunte behaving? How did he appear to be feeling during that interaction?
He was really scared. Like, I've never seen him like that before. Because if you know Daunte like this, it's just really happy, he's positive, and you can't really be like sad or depressed or angry or mad around him.
NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Minneapolis. Shaq, good morning. Powerful testimony there from Daunte Wright's girlfriend. What else did she say while she was on the stand?
Well, she gave us a unique perspective because she was in the vehicle. She was in the car in the moments before, during, and after Daunte Wright was shot. So you heard her there mention how he was during the initial exchange with police officers when they pulled him over. But then she explained what happened and how it escalated so quickly once Daunte Wright got back in the vehicle, was shot, and then the vehicle sped off and crashed into another one just down the street. And in that moment, she said that is one that has traumatized her, and she said she tried to save his life, and you could tell the impact it had on her that she wasn't able to do it. Listen to that moment.
I just put my hands over his chest and I just tried to hold it, and I was just trying to scream his name. And I was just trying to have him talk to me, and just kept saying, Daunte, like, Daunte, like, just say something, please, like, just talk to me. And he just couldn't. Like, I know he tried, like, I know he wanted to. Because I replay that image in my head daily.
She said just after that moment, a video call came through from Daunte's mother, and she was frantic and picked up the phone, told his mother what happened, and then pointed the camera at Daunte so she can see the condition that her son was in. And she apologized to Katie, Daunte's mother, who was in the courtroom at the moment, saying she shouldn't have done that and that no mother should see her son in that condition, Joe.
So, Shaq, we've now heard from two emotional witnesses, Daunte Wright's girlfriend and his mother. Who else do we think prosecutors are going to call?
Two emotional witnesses, but we heard from a lot of witnesses over these first 2 days of testimony. About 9 people we heard from yesterday. And prosecutors have been calling up officers and first responders who were on the scene after that crash, including the first person to get to that scene. And what they're trying to underscore is the idea that those officers who arrived at that crash, they didn't know what just happened a couple of blocks away in their vantage point. They didn't know how many people were in the vehicle. They didn't know that Daunte Wright was shot and severely injured, and that it was an accident, according to the officer that shot him. And that is what prosecutors are trying to underscore, that there was key information that was held off. Key information that Kim Potter knew but was never radioed in, because as we saw during the first day of testimony, she was crying. She was inconsolable. She was in the grass, face down, crying because she said she accidentally shot someone and she was fearing she was going to prison.
And Shaq, quickly on this last one, what should we expect from Potter's defense team as the trial moves forward?
You keep seeing them emphasize Daunte Wright's actions. They're saying that his actions by trying to evade police, by getting back in that vehicle, his actions led to the conditions that led to what they admit was an accident when Kim Potter reached for her gun instead of her taser and fired that single shot into him. She has pleaded not guilty to those counts that you're looking at on your screen right now, those 2 counts of manslaughter, one in the first degree, second, and the other in second degree, and they carry that maximum penalty of 15 years in prison. But you continue to hear them point to Daunte Wright's actions, saying that his actions led to the accident that ultimately cost his life, Joe.
Jack Brewster reporting from Minnesota. Thank you, Shaq. Time to get a check on your morning news now weather as we head into the weekend. Bill Cairns is with us. Bill, good morning. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday. Good morning. Yeah, with busy weekends ahead, right? Only 2 weekends left before Christmas. And yeah, this one is going to be interesting. This weather is going to be very changeable as we go throughout the weekend in the nation. So the worst of it now is heading into the plains. We got a pretty decent little mini snowstorm that's going to move through Nebraska, southern portions of the Dakotas, and also southern Minnesota is going to get it pretty good too. We have been seeing snow overnight in the mountains of Colorado, which is great for the ski resorts. They desperately needed to start with something. So about 13 million people are in these winter weather alerts. Most of these are winter storm warnings. And you notice that Minneapolis has just been moved into the winter storm warning. The storm has been trending a little bit higher for snowfall totals in the Twin Cities. Right now we have Minneapolis right about 6 inches of snow. The high end would be up to about 10. The low end would probably be about 3. But we got you right around 4 to 8. Most of the heavier snows will be from Sioux Falls, just south of Minneapolis, La Crosse, up to about Rhinelander. And as far as severe weather goes, so there's the warm side of the storm also, and this is going to be a dangerous scenario later on tonight. You know, obviously, the sun sets just about as early as it ever does right now. And we're going to have a lot of these storms later this afternoon into this evening. So that means nocturnal thunderstorms and possible tornadoes. Nighttime tornadoes are always the most deadly. We have 25 million people at risk. So before you go to, before you head to dinner tonight, make sure you know in Memphis to Nashville to Paducah to Louisville, Lexington, possibly St. Louis and Indianapolis, there is a chance of tornadoes this evening in your area. We expect maybe even a few strong tornadoes. So for today's forecast, there's the warm side, Dallas, 83, the cold side, Billings to Minneapolis. In the East Coast, your warm-up is coming. We'll talk more about the weekend forecast coming up next hour, but a little sneak peek, 71 degrees in D.C. on Saturday.
All right.
That's going to be something.
I'm going to be in D.C. on Saturday, so I like to hear that. Thank you, Bill.
Your own personal forecast.
For me. Thank you. All right.
All right, pack your bags, folks. Platform 9 3/4. We're heading back to Hogwarts. Harry Potter fans across the globe are getting ready for the upcoming special. It marks 20 years of the movies. It features all new interviews and cast conversations about the franchise. HBO Max tweeted a photo of Harry, Hermione, and Ron, also known as Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint. They're now in their early 30s, and they are sitting around a coffee table in what fans will recognize as the Gryffindor Common Room. Harry Potter 20th Anniversary Return to Hogwarts. That premieres on January 1st on HBO Max. You want to make sure you've got your butterbeer and your chocolate frogs ready to go. Joe, you're a fan, right?
Yeah, no, I like the movies. I never read the books. Did you?
I read all the books.
You
yeah,
did?
they were
All right.
fantastic. I actually read the last one, I think, on my honeymoon. That's how old I was when I got into the game, but I'm glad I did.
And how much you liked them, too.
I
My
did.
goodness. All
They were
right.
fantastic.
All right, thanks, Vicki. New developments in that deadly shooting on the set of Alec Baldwin's movie Rust. Baldwin has now posted a letter on social media that he says is from members of the Rust film production crew. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer reports on what's in that letter.
Vicki and Joe, good morning. This letter paints a different picture of what was happening behind the scenes. This is Alec Baldwin steps back into the spotlight.
Making a return to the stage overnight and also hosting virtually.
Welcome to the Robert F. Kennedy.
Alec Baldwin did not address the tragedy on the set of Rust just days after his interview with ABC News.
The trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
But the sheriff's office says whatever Baldwin's recollection is, the firearm was somehow manipulated in a manner that caused it to fire the bullet that struck Miss Hutchins, resulting in her death. The investigation moving forward as the veteran actor posted this letter Baldwin says is from some of the film's crew. The description of Rust as a chaotic, dangerous, and exploitative workplace are false, it reads. It's common to work on unprofessional or hectic productions. Rust was not one of them. One of the crew members tells NBC News the note was signed by over 24 members of the production. A rebuttal to allegations the Western was riddled with unsafe working conditions, which some suggest may have led to the death of cinematographer ALAYNA Hutchins. Concerns Baldwin says he was never made aware of.
I did not observe any safety or security issues at all in the time I was there.
Before the fatal shooting, crew members say several people walked off the set citing multiple grievances, including worries about safety. The letter's author writing, "Those disgruntled few do not represent the views of all of us." Lane Looper was one of those who resigned and retained an attorney. He spoke to us last month.
Look, I went to work every day unwittingly playing a game of Russian roulette. I can't say that I regret leaving.
This morning, as more questions swarm over the deadly shooting and a growing number of crew members speak out, conditions behind the scenes are once again taking center stage.
And this morning, the sheriff's office tells us it could still be several more weeks, if not months, until their investigation is complete. Vicki and Joe, back to you guys.
All right, thank you, Miguel.
For nearly half a century, the parents of Kyle Klink Scales never gave up hope their son would be found after he vanished near Auburn University. They said they sadly died without getting the closure they had been hoping for. But a new discovery may provide answers for the rest of his family. NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez has details.
An incredible discovery leads to new clues in a 45-year-old cold case. Police pulling out this car from inside a creek in Georgia after it had been there for nearly half a century. They say it belonged to Kyle Clinkscales, a student at Auburn University who disappeared on his way back to school from his hometown of LaGrange one night. It was 1976.
For 45 years, we've looked for this young man and looked for this car, and we've drained lakes, and we've looked here and looked there and ran this theory down and that theory down, and it's always turned out nothing.
Now, finally, something. After a call from someone who saw the vehicle submerged in the water, law enforcement arrived on scene and removed it. Right in front of them, their first clue.
And there was one bone that we noticed sticking up out of the mud.
But there was more inside the car. A wallet, ID, credit cards, all belonging to Kyle. Police also believe the bones in the car are human. For decades after his disappearance, Kyle's family never gave up looking for him.
Any closure is better than none at all.
He was his parents' only child, gone at 22 years old.
Then you don't ever give up hope.
This development, a bittersweet revelation, as both of them have since passed. His mother, Louise, dying earlier this year, just months shy of having witnessed this moment.
I just hate that we can't share it with his mother.
Now these questions burning more than ever.
Was he murdered and left there? Did he run off the road and wreck there? That's some things we hope to discover, but it's been 45 years.
How likely is it that investigators are going to be able to determine whether this was Kyle and what happened to him?
I would say it's nearly 100% certain that they could at least identify who he is, whether it is Kyle. It's a lot more difficult to say what happened to somebody when the condition of the remains is very poor.
For years, investigators did look into Kyle's disappearance as a possible murder. In 2006, a man named Jimmy Jones claimed he was there, quote, the day Kyle was shot, according to court documents. But prosecutors concluded Jones had changed his story too many times and was, quote, totally worthless as a witness. Officials will determine whether to reopen the case once the newfound evidence is analyzed. Isa Gutierrez, NBC News.
Uber is launching a new feature it says will help protect passengers and drivers. A hotel chain will let you use your phone as your room key.
Yeah, plus, if you are a coffee fanatic, and on this show, most of us are, one airline has just the flight for you. Take a look.
We start this morning with an important consumer alert. Over 200,000 pounds of ham and pepperoni are being voluntarily recalled due to a possible listeria contamination. The products were sold by Alexander and Hornung. The USDA said consumers should check its website to see what specific products are impacted. There have been no reported illnesses. Uber releasing a new feature that allows passengers and drivers to record sound during trips. The company said the feature is only to be used for safety purposes, and both parties will be alerted when it's activated. How often do you forget your hotel room keys? Apple is partnering with Hyatt to offer digital room keys. Customers can use their iPhone or Apple Watch to scan into their rooms. Hyatt says it expects to roll out the feature widely next year. BOGO all the way. Alaska Airlines just unveiled a new Starbucks-themed aircraft that will feature reusable holiday cups for passengers. The airline said it's also offering a buy one, get one ticket-free deal as part of its partnership with the drink maker.
How do you like that? Get fully caffeinated on your flight.
Now, do they have a barista on the flight?
Yeah, that's coming next,
That's a good idea. All right, thank you for that. All right, Fox News has replaced and relit the 50-foot Christmas tree outside its New York headquarters after it was set on fire earlier this week. A 49-year-old man was arrested on Wednesday and charged with 7 counts, including arson, criminal mischief, and reckless endangerment. The suspect was later released pending a court date. The fire did not cause any injury. We're back with more on a frank and surprising new interview from former Secretary of State and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. In it, she discusses former President Trump at length and why she believes if he were elected again, it could mean the end of the country.
NBC's chief Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell has more.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton predicting former President Donald Trump will try to reclaim the White House in 2024. With dire consequences for the country if he wins.
If I were a betting person right now, I say Trump is going to run again. But I want people to understand that this is a make or break point.
The two-time presidential candidate sitting down with Willie Geist says America now faces a choice between truth and lies.
Are we going to give in to all of these lies and this disinformation and this organized effort to undermine our rule of law and our institutions, or are we going to stand up to it?
Clinton has been an historic yet polarizing figure in her 3 decades on the national stage. In the 2016 campaign, Trump ignited crowds against her, something she refuses to take personally.
They are motivated by people who do want to tear me down.
I've just received a call from Secretary Clinton.
Those final hours of election night in 2016, with Clinton not expecting to lose. It's famously believed she only prepared an acceptance speech. Now reading those undelivered words in her new masterclass video titled The Power of Resilience, reflecting on her late mother's struggles as a young girl, never imagining her daughter's success.
I dream of going up to her and sitting down next to her, taking her in my arms and saying, "Look at me."
Clinton choking up as she reads what she had written for an election victory.
And as hard as it might be to imagine, your daughter will grow up and become the President of the United States.
Andrea Mitchell, thank you. And you can catch more of Willie's interview on Sunday Today. The lights of Broadway are shining again as new shows and old favorites return to action here in New York.
Yes, it's so great to see the return of Broadway. Some of those productions will be looking a little different and more diverse than you might remember. Theater writer and content creator Felicia Fitzpatrick joins us now. Good morning, Felicia. A revival of Stephen Sondheim's landmark musical Company. It opened on Broadway yesterday with some major changes that were actually made by the theater icon himself before he died last month. Tell us all about that.
Well, you know, him and director Marianne Elliott got together to revise the character of Bobby, who was usually played by a male, and it was now played by Katrina Lenk. And as we know, he passed away a few weeks ago, and Sondheim was just such a beloved figure in the theater community and beyond. Because, you know, I've seen friends of all walks of life post letters that he sent them or, you know, selfies they took with him. And talked about how much he inspired them as artists and how much his work impacted them. So I think seeing someone like Sondheim, who was such a legend in this industry, be open to change, to say, yes, let's make the lead character a woman, was really powerful because he could have just been like, I'm Sondheim, and I'm not changing anything. You know, I wrote this in 1970, and I want it performed exactly as I wrote it. But he and the director, Marianne, were like, let's explore these new layers. Let's examine what we can learn with a new lead character. And I saw it right before everything closed in March 2020, and it resonated. I was like, I feel like this character should have always been a woman. Honestly, I loved it.
Oh, good.
That's good. I'm excited. We were supposed to see it on Saturday. Patti LuPone was out, so we traded in our tickets. We're going to see it later this month. You got to see Patti LuPone in that.
Got to see Patti LuPone.
No kidding. All right. So some other big shows like Book of Mormon and Hamilton are also making efforts to be more inclusive and diverse. What should we know about those?
So, yeah, I was thinking about this. For a while, we've seen the efforts of diversity and representation and inclusion and equity really focus on casting. But now we're seeing this shift. So it's producing, it's direction, it's the writers really kind of working together to shift the text, to shift the staging as we move forward and continue momentum in these areas. So we're seeing script changes in the Book of Mormon and in The Lion King. We're seeing staging with Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings in Hamilton. And I think it's really important to see these hit shows make changes because they're the blockbuster musicals that cast or perhaps maybe they have a wider, bigger audience that is paying attention to them. They're the ones that have, you know, multiple national tours or performances on national TV. So their impact leaves kind of like a larger footprint than the shows that you can only see in New York, right? And so if audiences across the country or the globe that are seeing these big shows kind of evolve and stay open to change, I think that sends a powerful message that we should also all, you know, be open to learning and growing together.
Yeah, Felicia, you are an expert in theater, and we talk about representation mattering both on stage and behind that curtain. Talk about this new approach, especially on the writing and producing side, because when you have people of diverse backgrounds coming together to create, different stories get told. So do you think this is going to signal a new era on Broadway moving forward?
I hope so, and I think so. theater and Broadway especially is really based on tradition. And there's been a lot of conversation, especially over the last 20 months, right, during the shutdown, of who are the gatekeepers, what are the power dynamics, and how do we change the old guard, all of that kind of stuff. And I think all of these changes that you're referring to are reminding us that theater is alive, it is supple, it is flexible, and theaters can be in like an open dialogue with it at all times, right? So if we're saying theater is a snapshot of the times, I think it's okay to revisit the work and see how the frame can be shifted, if you will, as the collective worldviews shift to be as inclusive as possible. I was just talking to Lear de Bessonnet, who is the new New York City Center Encore's artistic director, a special title, but a mouthful. And she said something really poignant, which was like, theater is a sanctuary for humanity, and it's at its best when everyone is included. And I was like, wow, I love that. And that's going to inform their new vision. They're having Lydia Diamond adapt The Tap Dance Kid. Billy Porter's working on The Life. And I think that's going to be able to revisit those scripts, is going to provide a more nuanced and authentic perspective to it all. And I hope we get more of that in the future.
It'll be interesting. It might bring some new audiences, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Felicia, thank you so much. Appreciate it. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.